is almost like an epicenter for new movements, new groups, bohemian thinking, radical stances, opinions, politics. It's one of those places that I've learned recently from doing research on the Satanic Panic movement and Charles Manson and Haight-Ashbury and the kind of like the counterculture of America in kind of the in the 60s and 70s. San Francisco is definitely one of those places that it seems like a breeding ground or home to that the type of thing where this could happen. Do you know if they had the same approach in San Francisco with the secrecy and the anonymity, or did they do that in New York because they had to rebrand because of the expose that happened in San Francisco?
Yeah, I don't think it was. They went underground after the San Francisco thing, and
okay,
they were frightened, and so they reopened in New York, rebranded with all of these rules, which, by the way, through the years have gotten more and more strict, especially in the age of the internet. And what they do now, I mean, they don't even call themselves school. They don't even.
Yeah, the information control must be.
It's very tight. What I understand, people now, they just deny, like people I know who were in it, who are still in it, who I've kind of bumped into, and they're not really allowed to talk to me or whatever. But they kind of, do. And they say it doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
Which is
false. It's almost like boot camp or training, and you're kind of versed in what to say if you come across somebody who used to be in the group that isn't any longer, and versed in what to say to friends and family when they inquire about what you're doing with all your spare time and why you're not around anymore. And it's kind of like a repeat after me situation almost, it feels like.
Yeah, people, let me just point out that you're not going to be able to find many. There's been probably a few thousand people who've gone through this group over the years.
Do you feel like it's holding you back in writing your book in terms of getting other people's accounts of the story, or
no? Not at all. No, not at all. I mean, the book is about me and my account, so I don't need to talk to anybody about it. I saw when I saw him, so I don't need to. It's really about me. It's a memoir. It's not really about the cult, although it's about my life there. But what I was going to say was that you're not going to find more than a handful of people who are willing to talk about the cult publicly. There have been some articles about the cult. There have been a couple of, there's a few blogs out there, but mine and only one other blog are not anonymous. There's only been like maybe half a dozen people who've come out and, put their name out. People are afraid. It's a whole other topic we could talk. I mean, we could talk about that for hours. Why people won't talk about it. And, part of me is like, damn it, talk about it, But the other part of me that thinks a little bit more is like, well, this was a trauma. And there's an enormous amount of reticence and shame to talk about any trauma. And then there's a lot of guilt and blame, but there's also a shame not just of the trauma, but a shame that you were in a cult. And if you're like me or anybody else with a profession, it doesn't sound so good that you're in a cult. Mind you, I have had no blowback whatsoever. My clients know I was in a cult. They love me. They don't care. I have new clients that come. It's not I advertise it, but it's not a reflection on me, at all.
And there's a lot that comes with speaking out, I think, and that's often why I think these episodes are so important, because speaking out publicly might not be for everybody. That's why there's a blog section on my website for anybody that wants to write in and tell their story and remain anonymous, just to contribute to speaking out. But
Right.
There is also active listening to these interviews where people can realize that there are things that they could be doing to improve their own situations, by listening to the experience and advice of others that do come and speak on the show. But there's a lot to be said for people that are fearful of speaking out, because it does come with a big responsibility, and again, it's that putting yourself out there and making yourself vulnerable, more extremely than I think joining a group such as this one, because you are admitting to yourself, I joined this group, I went with this group, and I stayed with them for this long. And now I'm kind of piecing my life back together afterwards and having to reintegrate myself into everyday society without having this group as part of my identity and personality, and almost having to come on the show and admit to the world that this was something you're a part of. And a lot of people, like you said, are ashamed of that, which I don't. I think that is it's a stigma that we try to break down on the show, and this is when I was reading your article, this is the perfect example of, when people say, oh, who would ever be dumb enough to join a cult? Like that is like such a false question to ask people, because like you said here, the target demographic for this particular group were people who were life learners, people who went to Ivy League education, and people who were in certain careers that would be seen as, high career paths and high attaining grades in school and further education. So when we talk about the inverted commas, the type of person that is indoctrinated or gone through the process of thought reform, or that horrible word brainwashed, however you want to look at it or word it, it's not one shoe fits all. Every single person is individual, and every single person is at risk of being manipulated and coerced into a group such as this one, and your story is a perfect example of that. So even though coming forward and speaking publicly isn't for everyone, it's so important for people like yourself who are willing to come forward, and although you may feel embarrassed or ashamed of the situation that you were kind of roped into and stayed with for so long, it's almost speaking for those people that couldn't come forward themselves and tell their story. So I know that I rambled on a little bit there, but I always like to get that point across when it comes up, when there's the opportunity to kind of put that forward, because I know a lot of people will be going through the same thing about the shame and the embarrassment, and it's something that we need to try and overcome by having these conversations.
I totally agree with everything you said. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I can't add more to it. Again, frustrating for me, because I want people I know who were in there to talk about it.
Yes.
And so they'll because I think they'll free themselves. But at the same time, who am I to tell anybody what to do? That's my friends who were there and who were out, and who aren't out, they're victims and they were abused. And part of the problem was they were told what to do and they did it. And I spend a lot of my life being very careful not to tell anybody what to do, including my son, who I have a right to tell what to do, and he needs to be told what to do. I'm just kidding. What to do. But really, that's one of my big takeaways. I don't like to be told what to do, and I don't want to tell anybody what to do. So that's really my motto on it, in terms of coming out and speaking. Yes. It's really personal. I mean, people have really good reasons for not speaking, but yep. I'm happy to be a spokesperson for anybody else. And if they want to, I think more people, when my book comes out, I think more people will come out and talk about it.
Yeah. I think again, it will only add to the truth of the story, around the vagueness, the school and the work. When you come forward with tangible events and dates and times and experiences, that's only going to add to the authenticity of this story, and other people who, haven't made their blogs named and have kept their story anonymous. So
exactly.
With this group, I mean, I know it was really secretive, so I'm assuming that there was no propaganda or kind of anything that was given to you to push onto the public.
It was like, it was very secretive. There was nothing in writing, but there was a highly sophisticated, time-consuming, financially consuming recruiting process that we were required to do for years, that was completely clandestine, where we would approach unsuspecting strangers, befriend them, and vet them and lure them into the cult. That's the whole episode. Seriously, right. That's like, it's like, you saw how they brought me.
Yeah.
But how they bring other people was just, I didn't know what was going on in the backgrounds.
Right. So you slowly got an insight into how you were brought into the movement. Was that not like strange for you? Did you not like reflect back on things and be like, oh my goodness, I remember exactly when Bruce did that to me?
Yeah, I did. I thought it was great because by then I was like in the cult for like a year and a half or two. I don't remember exactly, but I wish I remember right off the hand, but off the top. But it's in, I think it was a year and a half or something. But by then I was really into it, and we were excited to be given the privilege to recruit. And it was a very sophisticated system. And yeah, I did recognize some of it. And I thought that Bruce did a terrible job of recruiting me because it was all so, clumsy and, suspicious and strange and odd. And I joked with him about it. I said, God, when I found out about how the recruiting was done, I said, you did an awful job. I said, yeah, you were a tough fish to reel in.
Well, I mean, if you had so many reservations and doubts into your integration into the group, then that would suggest that the method he used wasn't as seamless as it is with, or should have been, if Bruce was somebody else from the group that applied the teachings a bit differently. Because what we've learned from these interviews with various guests is that there are very methodical and meticulous teachings and practices in place to very carefully bring people into the group by promising them everything that they are looking for in life, whether they've realized it or not, because you didn't think you were missing anything at this point. And then once they kind of have that promise, it's introducing them to the group with the love bombing aspect and kind of making it feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves. Whether that comes in a biblical sense or, you're part of a yoga group or whatever form it takes.
Right.
So yeah, it's interesting that you had that conversation with Bruce afterwards. But the really difficult question that I do ask people when there have been recruitment processes like this is whether you yourself did bring anybody into the group that managed to, that kind of stayed, and whether they're still a part of it to your knowledge.
No, I was terrible at recruiting, and I never brought anybody. I shouldn't say I was terrible. I was good, I guess, because I couldn't lie so much to people about it. And it was as the years went by, it became more difficult to recruit. And I mean, we would meet hundreds and hundreds of people, and maybe 10 would come in. and then maybe 5 would stay. So because of the secrecy and the kind of requirements and who they would let in and who they wouldn't. I mean, they wouldn't recruit anyone of color. They didn't want anybody who was gay. They didn't want anybody who was a writer. They didn't want anybody who was a journalist. They didn't want anybody who would be possibly write about them. They didn't want anybody who was, who was, involved in law enforcement, who worked for the FBI or anything like that, or the IRS. And so they were highly paranoid, and they, although they did recruit some people who were gay, and because Sharon had this idea of gay conversion, and she would arrange marriages between, gay men and straight women.
Sharon and her stance on relationships is something that I really did want to discuss specifically, because it has many similarities to different groups that we've spoken about on the show. But that's really interesting that you said that. So by this point, if you've been involved for a few years, it's kind of 92, 93?
Yeah.
And there's kind of homophobic and racist connotations and themes coming through with the kind of recruitment process and who to approach and who not to approach. And I know that the Western world has become more liberal in its approach towards people of color and members of the LGBTQIA plus community. But it's interesting that Sharon's instructions are to keep the recruitment sort of middle class white men and women at that point.
Oh yeah, I mean, she had her reasons. They were certainly racist. They were racist. That's all. I mean, that was the big reason. It was racist, and like a lot of racists, she said, "Oh, it's not racism. It's because." I'm not getting into it right now because it's like I don't want to talk about it. I love talking about it, but it's just like a whole. I mean, we could be talking about this for 2 weeks, but
yeah.
I go into it in the book, and you need a little bit more background to understand how she explained it and why I and other people accepted this shit. I mean, we just accepted this. Like, we didn't, recruit black people. But we didn't say, what the fuck is wrong? Nobody said that. I mean, we did, but she had a good answer for us.
Yeah. And that's exactly what I was going to say. When I spoke to Ronit and I asked her some questions, she was like, well, don't you want me to save anything from the book? Don't you want me to leave some information out so people might go and read my book? And so I do appreciate you saying, like, it's all explained in my writing. So I'm not going to go into it too much here. But again, Sharon's got a perfect way of explaining away any credible questions that come up. Anything that people, well, why can't we have different ethnicities in our group? Why are we only accepting people of a certain religion or no religion? Or why aren't we accepting the gay men and women? Like, she has a very good way, again, of explaining away the reasons why you can't question that, why you can't do that. And it's interesting to hear. At that point, you're kind of like, well, we did question it, but it was explained away. And in your book, you explain why that's accepted, and I think it's absolutely fair enough for us to leave that point there and move on to the next thing, and that's just around fundraising, which you touched on briefly around the subscription, the monthly subscription, the upfront payments of a few months at a time, and then the wealthier people who Sharon understood were the wealthier people and approached for donations of things like boats money towards the ranch and things like that.
Oh yeah, and they bought her apartment at the Plaza Hotel.
Oh, and that's where she was living at the time you wrote the article that I read?
Yes. She lived in the Plaza Hotel, she had an $8.5 million apartment there.
Wow.
Which was paid for substantially by, her disciples. And, she had an entire network of real estate, around the world. It often was not in her name, was in the name of other people. And she, was pulling in about $1 million a year in cash. Lived a very, very lavish lifestyle. And she loved to live that way. That was what she liked.
Let's talk about Sharon, who she was, where she came from, and how it must have been kind of like in NXIVM and Scientology, where there are certain figures involved that have credibility almost because of who they are, where they've come from, and the fact that there is some notoriety to their name. And I feel like Sharon Gan is almost one of those. When you look at Scientology, people are like, well, it must be credible because Tom Cruise is such a big name and he's involved with Scientology. And there's a lot around Scientology that push for people of influence to be brought into the fold. And the same with NXIVM, when people go to the workshops and they're like, wow, these people have been on telly, they've been in films, we've got famous people leading this workshop. It must be all on the up and up because these people wouldn't be involved and risk their integrity, their personality, and their public image if there was anything untoward happening. And I feel like this group could almost have had that perhaps with Sharon once she realised who she is and where she's come from if you didn't immediately recognise her when she came to your first sessions.
Well, it was actually the opposite with this, because if you knew who Sharon was, you would never go there because she had a bad reputation in the papers as a cult leader. And nobody knew about that because there was no internet. So she and Fred, we know that he was also involved with the group, and every other name we'd have known. If we knew who they were, we would never have set foot in that fucking place. No way. But you couldn't because there's no way you would have known because you just couldn't. Even with the best due diligence, you wouldn't have known. Maybe if you were lucky. But what they did do was they hid who they were, but they established credibility with the people, with the recruiters. So like, Bruce, who recruited me, had a lot of credibility, his background. And then as you went there, they all, even the teachers, they had their own, you could tell they were intelligent. You knew they were professionals. They were of the same intellectual abilities as you. So you kind of had to trust there. But there was no Tom Cruise or any, names there.
No. I guess the only reason I'm drawing that parallel is because Sharon herself is an actress who appeared,
right.
Nobody knew that. Right, okay. I guess, I know that now because I have the internet, like you said, back in the day you didn't have, so I could go look at...
What wasn't like, she was in Slaughterhouse-Five in 1970, when? What year was it?
1972, yeah.
72, okay, this was 1989, we were all like in our 20s. How many people saw that movie? I mean, and you she didn't say what her name was. So it was like, even if you saw the movie, it would be like, oh, maybe. But,
Yeah. So she wasn't using her Hollywood status.
No, I didn't even know about it. No, I didn't know about it.
Right. I thought when I did my initial research that would be used to position herself as somebody that is trustworthy because she is kind of notable in the industry. She's won like an Obie Award and she,
right, yeah.
She's been in a few award-winning TV shows. So, and she went to Berkeley, which again, I think is Ivy League education.
No, but it's a very good school.
Okay.
I'm not sure she actually went there. That's what the internet says. The way she put herself out was that she was this teacher of mystical ancient knowledge. And so it was the acting thing, which she did talk about later on, was not a pitch for her.
Right. Okay. Brilliant. Okay. So we're not talking kind of Tom Cruise in Scientology. It's kind of very much the opposite of that. Okay, that's really interesting and great to know. And so Sharon comes to this first session. A few people are like, well, no thanks, we're going to dip out. A few people are like, including yourself, are like, okay, she's a bit odd, but not enough to kind of deter me from coming back. So I will keep coming back. How does your relationship go from that one meeting of your initial interaction with Sharon to you becoming one of her kind of almost closest confidants moving forward and spending these 20 plus years in this movement?
Well, let me just say this. When you say one of her closest confidants, if any of her other close confidants were watching this, they would say, he wasn't a close confidant, I was. She had a way of making people feel that she was your closest confidant.
Right. And almost like competitive amongst each other.
Exactly.
Okay.
But that being said, I was close with her. She did divulge a lot of her life to me. And we did spend a lot of time alone. I'm sure more than a lot of other people. But I'm sure there are people who spent more time alone with her, but you can just tell the way I'm describing it that there was this competitive thing.
Yeah.
Wanting to spend time with their cult leader. But how did it go? I it was just a slow process. And she had this ability to, I really don't know how to answer the question. It was a long process of going from, being not so sure about her to her appearing to give really good advice about people's lives. I mean, that's what they did. When Sharon started coming to class, it became less about like this studying this knowledge to more about personal help in people's lives and how to navigate their jobs, how to navigate their marriages, how to navigate, interpersonal relationships with other people. So it sort of shifted. And Sharon, was quite sure of herself on every single topic and had many years of experience in dealing with this. So,
she's charismatic. She is coming across as if she has the answers to the questions that all of us have. How do I navigate this job? How do I navigate my family? How do I raise my kids? How do I keep my spouse happy? Am I with the right person? How do I move forward in life? These are all questions that people have, and this charismatic woman is coming across as if she has all of the answers.
Yeah.
You want to hear what she has to say.
Yeah, and you want to be in on it. You want to see what she's got, and you're like, wow, she owns this school. She must, she's impressive.
The teachers are impressed by her. Yeah,
everybody's impressed by her. If she shows favor to me, everybody else is going to like me. They're going to think I'm great. She controlled, like, if I wanted to date someone in class or they wanted to date somebody or me or something, you had to ask permission from Sharon to hang out with these people. And so she wasn't going to just grant that permission willy-nilly. And look, that was a big part of it, of being there, which was the social aspect of it. If people wanted to fraternize with their classmates, and you had to ask Sharon. And, Sharon, it became clear Sharon was, as time went by, she would arrange couples. She arranged marriages. She, when some people had unwanted pregnancies, she convinced them to go to full term and put the children up for adoption to other families in the group. So she had enormous power.
Yeah.
So it was, you only wanted to be around this powerful person.
And to be kind of her chosen person as well, from the competitive aspect that you mentioned before.
Yeah.
But, there's so many things.
It's like, here's the thing. I mean, this is like not so surprising to anybody. This exists. This dynamic is not a shocking dynamic. What's interesting about it is that it's all fake. It's all nonsense. It's smoke and mirrors. Sharon had absolutely no real insight or powers into anything. I mean, once in a while she did. She certainly made people feel good. And I had many years there where I was very happy. Most of them were miserable, the years. But it's phony. It's not like, she was not like the queen. You have a queen over there, right? In England?
We do, yeah. Lizzie.
She's Queen Elizabeth. She's really a queen, She's born into this, family, and she does a lot of things, and there's a history, and she does her thing, okay?
Yeah.
Sharon was not born a queen, but she pretended she formed her own kingdom with subjects, and that's what she wanted. But she wasn't a queen or anything. She was just a sociopath.
So, hang on. So there's so many things. Right, let me just go.
Yeah.
Sharon comes along to a few of these sessions, and then it sounds from what you've said like she becomes a regular person in your life. Like, you see her more often than not. So is she kind of at the ranch when you're expected to go? Are you spending more one-to-one time with her in the evening sessions that you attend? Talk us through how that relationship develops, and then we can talk about how she then ends up having more influence over the members to kind of do things like give up their children.
Yeah. Okay. So the reason, well, she started to come to class more regularly, like once a week. So we expected to see her once a week, although she didn't always attend. That was one way we saw her more. Then she started to invite select students, like 20 out of 60 that were in the class, to come to Montana, to her ranch for a couple of weeks, where you worked one-on-one with her, where she'd meet with us throughout the day. I mean, that's a whole nother chapter about what went on out there. But
right,
that was like, we would see her, for one very lengthy meeting during the day, and then for dinner, for hours, we would spend with her. The rest of the time we were working and doing building and construction projects at her ranch. But she only invited certain people to go to that. There were people usually had more money and they could afford to go to it. And although that wasn't ever said, it was, we were told we were the more advanced students, right? Which, it wasn't until later on that I sort of figured, oh, well, they only invited, Jimmy and Mary and Bobby, and they all, make more than, Kathy and Randy, whatever. So that, when I started to go on Montana retreats, she called them, I spent more time with her and I got to know her more.
Yeah.
She got to know me more. And she wanted to have closer relationships with those people. And, she had a lot of influence on those people. And so that was really how it developed.
Right. Okay. And then she goes on to have kind of so much influence over people that, as you mentioned, they're willing to give up their their newborn children to families in the group that can't have children or are kind of after a few more children. How does that work?
This is secondhand. So the whys.
Okay.
I don't really know why it happened. I am going to guess that at least a couple of situations, they were, unexpected pregnancies that occurred. And Sharon, and there were families women and couples in the cult also who could not conceive.
Okay.
And so she arranged for the children to be, instead of people having abortions, to give up the children for adoption. But they were all privately done. And there's a lot of very odd things about some of these adoptions in that.
Yeah. I'm sure there's a lot of trauma related to those situations.
Yeah, because they weren't handled well. I mean, children weren't told they were adopted.
And this is where kind of, when I was reading your article and doing a bit more research on this subject, is where I started to draw parallels between this group and Synanon with Charles Diederich, who would kind of encourage or almost even enforce members to have vasectomies and abortions when they were up to 4 months pregnant, which in this country would be illegal. And it is quite a significant thing. And then digging further into the group, I started to make comparisons between this group and Rajneeshpuram in Oregon and Aum Shinrikyo over in Japan, because they were very, especially Aum Shinrikyo, were very specific about trying to recruit people of notable skills in certain careers. Like yourself as a lawyer would be very accepted in a group like Aum Shinrikyo and in Rajneeshpuram, because they were very heavily influenced on political strategies and furthering themselves in terms of creating their own sarin gas or their own forms of E. coli and things that were used that they weaponized to create certain attacks. And I don't know if you know if there was any evidence that Sharon was ever planning on carrying out anything like this, but it's kind of a question that I wanted to ask, because there's a very specific demographic that she was targeting, or if that was just because she knew the monetary value of the types of people that she was kind of recruiting into the movement.
She in San Francisco, they were not. They were just interested in people who were, able to do physical labor. But I think she figured the better model is to, recruit less people and charge them more. And for that, she wanted people who made more money, and she didn't want people struggling. And she figured she was smart. I mean, she was, she was, let's say, crafty, shrewd, and knew her market. And she wanted, I mean, that was, you had to make a certain amount of money in order to be in the cult. And, if people lost their jobs or something, it was a problem and they needed to get a new job. You couldn't not have a job. You couldn't not have income. I mean, if you didn't, you might be kicked out. If you didn't pay your tuition on time, it was a problem.
Do you ever remember any accounts of somebody being kind of forcibly removed from the group because they can financially contribute?
Oh yeah, it happened all the time. People would lose their jobs, and or people just couldn't pay, and they'd be asked to leave. They wouldn't come back.
The thing is, then, like, even if a disgruntled ex-member couldn't go and speak on the record about this group because it's so vague in how it's a very strange one, this one, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I also think people were, like, nobody speaks out about this thing. They just, like, she had some power to keep people from talking about it that was remarkable.
It's almost like when we talk about, like, the Hare Krishnas, and they are encouraged to chant with their beads and say, a certain verse over and over again, a certain amount of times for however many beads that they have. And then they do that a certain amount of times a day. And it's almost like how many times it's like 20, is it 21 days to form a habit or something like that?
Yeah, something like that.
How many times a day do you have to say or think this is a secret for you to then leave the group 5 years later, and even 15 years later still be saying this is a secret and not mention it or not speak about it to anybody, because you're so hardwired at that point to not be able to talk about it because it's a secret. And these, again, are the things that are often stigmatized that we need to discuss when they get the opportunity on these short interviews, because I don't know how long it must take, and it must vary person to person depending on kind of what tools they have at their expense to be able to come forward and say it's still a secret, but I'm still going to talk about it. And I can't imagine how difficult and strange it must be for you even now to be openly discussing Sharon and her techniques and the experiences that you had. And I don't know if were there any other restrictions in place in terms of just keeping secrets? I mean, were you expected to dress in a certain way, or were you expected to eat and drink certain things, or restrict yourself in your diets at all?
No, there were no clothing or diet restrictions
or relationships. I mean, were you?
Well, we were restricted from seeing each other outside of classes unless we had permission.
How would you gain permission for that? Would you go and seek a teacher and explain that situation to them?
Yeah, you mean you would have to talk to one of the teachers and say, I want to see so and so for some reason. Usually it was like a romantic situation.
Right. And what would happen if you were found to be communicating with people without permission?
You'd have a problem. You'd have to, you'd be called out on it, probably humiliated in public, or, it would be you'd be ridiculed. You wouldn't do it. You'd be discouraged. There were a lot of things in place to discourage it. And also people would tell, like if I called up Samantha and asked her out on a date, she might just call Fred and say, Spencer just called me out on a date. And so they'd find out, people would tattletale all the time. But
so there's like a public shaming and self-policing system involved in the group at this point.
Exactly. That's
wow.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to navigate.
Yeah, I like how I'm able to describe these things, and you say, yes, it's self-policing and shaming. Like, I don't think in those terms. I just think of it like what happened. But, I mean, that's the way the language in my head still, because I don't, I mean, I've been out for, almost 10 years, but the language of it is still very much in me. we'll get to that, I guess, about the last.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there were lots of rules. I mean, we weren't allowed to take drugs. That was one thing. We weren't allowed to take drugs.
Okay.
We had to be on time for class. We couldn't miss a class. We had to be on time for class. We were, there were lots of exercises that we had to do throughout the day. We had to do this thing called self-observation, where we had to write down our thoughts during the day. We were required to, 3 times a day, we were required to say a mantra 5 times a day. We had to do these things when we woke up, certain things, some exercises when we woke up, exercises when we went to bed. So your whole day is all kinds of... What's that called? What would you call that?
Yeah. So, okay. So here's the very kind of systematic approach towards everything focused on the group. You're already dedicating so much of your free time to the group in the evenings, but now during the daytime, even when you're carrying out other activities which aren't necessarily related to the group, you're having to bring your thoughts back to the group and the mission of the group and the teachings of the group through things like saying mantras, which again is going back to sort of what the Hare Krishnas do with their beads and spending so much of their time doing the meditation.
Right.
It leaves up very little space in your mind for anything that isn't revolving around this group and the group practices. And so it always keeps them at the forefront of your mind, which means that there's not a lot of space for free thinking, critical thinking, doubt, questioning, because there's a list of instructions that you need to carry out, and very cleverly spaced out so that there's just a amount of time left for you to, not have those questions or seeds of doubt transpire into anything more than just things that can be kind of brushed away.
Right. And plus, I wouldn't tell anybody about any of this stuff.
Absolutely, yeah.
The first time I told somebody about this whole group was like, a few weeks before I left. I was kind of on the fence to go. And once I told them about it, they were like, "Are you kidding me? Really? You're in a cult?" I was like, "What?" But that's another long, long story. We're not there yet. That's in the book.
Yeah. There's a lot in the book, and we're going to talk about the book at the very end.
Yeah, but hold on. I'm not trying to. I just want to add something about this filling up your time. Like, I'm thinking, like, I just told you at the beginning, it was like, oh, we went 2 nights a week, but no, it was so much more. They also had an acting class, which they encouraged us to take, which was taught by somebody who was not in the cult, but he was friends with the leader, and so that was on weekends, and then we also. We had a lot of building projects. Sharon had homes, so not me, but a lot of other people helped build. I did a lot of construction out in Montana, compound in Pauling. Sharon's had a house in the Hamptons, and a lot of people worked on that.
Right.
Apartment people worked on. So these things would take a lot of time, and they were done with secrecy. When Sharon's husband was dying, I was asked to stay with him, stay at their home for nights on end as a caretaker. Sharon had me as a chauffeur. I also cooked meals for Sharon. A lot of people cooked meals for Sharon. Before classes at night, a lot of people would come early and work hours to get the class ready, and people would stay late to clean. People would spend hours on all kinds of things, laboring for them for no money. I mean, in fact, we paid them to work for them. I mean, we just labored. It was quite the switcheroo.
And when it came down to kind of Sharon leading these groups and kind of and taking the leadership of these sessions as opposed to the teachers that you had at first, what would you say was Sharon's leadership style?
It was a very different than the other teachers. The other teacher's style was much more formal and more focused on the teachings in the books, the Fourth Way teachings of Gertrude von Uspensky. Sharon's was just a freewheeling evening where people would stand up and one by one ask to be speak to her as if you were speaking to, Jesus Christ or Buddha or the Queen or something. And she created an atmosphere where you felt, she made people feel like they were talking to, Buddha. She sounded like that.
And this is an expectation that she introduced herself? So
yes.
she wanted to be revered by the group members and her followers.
Yeah, in fact, now you remind me, the first time she came to a class, this was the odd thing she said was, she was describing the levels of man. She said there were, several different levels of man, seven levels of man, corresponding with consciousness, degrees of consciousness, the man number 7 being the most conscious, man number 1 being the least. And she said that, everyone in class was in the first 3 rungs, and the people in 7 were like, conscious beings, like, for instance, Jesus Christ or Buddha or Moses or, names like this. And she said that she wasn't there yet. She was working hard on it, and she was almost there. And I was like,
wow.
I looked at my neighbors to see, did anybody else catch that I'm almost there? And, the other teachers didn't blink. And everybody else is like, WTF? Really? But nobody said anything. And I was just like, huh? And then you just slowly bought the concept that she was up there.
Yeah. And self kind of titled as well, that she was self-professed that she was up there.
Yeah, I mean, it's no different than Donald Trump saying, me and me alone can fix the problems of the world. It's the most ridiculous thing that anybody could say. And it's the least true. And that was the same thing that Sharon did.
Well, Donald Trump's always a touchy subject on this show because of QAnon and all that stuff that comes with the evangelical movement across America and everything going on in Texas at the moment. And
I'm going to steer clear of what political side you're on, but there's been a lot of comparisons made of his style to cult leaders, for sure.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, there's a whole book by cult expert Stephen Hassan, whose bite model we use on this show, called The Cult of Trump. And it's very poignant. Yeah. I'm sure, to me, as somebody who's kind of more left-leaning, it makes more sense than any autobiography by Donald Trump that I could read. But then again, who knows? That these charismatic people have a way of wording things and pitching things that make sense to people like us who think that we could never be drawn into these types of high demand controlling groups. And that's why we're here speaking today. And even you said, like, at the start, I'll never join a cult. And now kind of 20, 30 years later, you're about to release a memoir about joining a cult. So, it's kind of full swing how we have these conversations. But I don't have too much left to ask. There are other things left on my list.
Please.
I just wanted to know if under Sharon's role specifically, kind of once you moved away from these other teachers that you did respect and have kind of a certain level of admiration for, who had the same level of respect and admiration for that person one step above them, kind of like a hierarchy or pyramid, which was Sharon, who then started teaching you and a smaller group, kind of close knit. If Sharon herself had any kind of forms of punishment that she would inflict on members that broke rules or anything like that might kind of put it into place or cement any kind of totalitarian approach to the group that she may have had.
Yeah, well, her word was final, and she was impetuous, and I've seen her, basically kick people out of school, people who've been in for years, whose family was there, and she would ask someone, throw somebody out of the room, and they would never come back, and they'd be shunned. Usually the punishment was intense ridicule and shaming, public shaming, which was devastating for people. And there was not a single person I'd seen in the group who hadn't suffered that. Every single person had at some point or other been publicly shamed and ridiculed.
Is that something that you experienced personally yourself?
Oh, yeah. Tons of times.
Did you give us like a specific example of when that had happened with you and Sharon?
Gosh. I don't know. She was early on, like one of the first times she came, and she looked at me and she said, how about you? Do you have anything to say? And I said, no, I'm just listening tonight. I don't have any comments, to say. Well, she just ripped into me and she said, she called me some names. I don't remember exactly what names, but she just ripped into me like, how dare you come into class unprepared and not ready to speak? If you don't speak at least every single time, you're going to be out of here. Now, that threat was really meaningful to me because I had been there already, a year and a half or something. I was already becoming dependent upon this place. And here she is threatening me to leave unless I come in and speak every time in class. Just say something, contribute. So it was humiliating. And I remember coming back in the next time and speaking about it. And the last time I saw her, she shrieked. I was in a very bad state at the end. I was, at my wit's end. I was spiraling down and suffering, tremendously and suicidal and all these bad things. And I'm sitting there in class. I'm sitting right in the front. And I remember sitting there, and I was just, sitting there, and she looked at me. She goes, "You're really negative, Spencer, and you need to snap out of it now." Now, it may not sound like much, but it was just the end of it for me. I mean, that was humiliating, ridiculous statement for her to make. But I had many others. And people had worse than I did.
So would you say that specific interaction between you and Sharon kind of marked the beginning of the end for you? Was that kind of where you became disenchanted slightly with the group at that point?
I was pretty much on the way out. I mean, that was my last night there. But for the previous 3 or 4 months were really tough months for me. And the previous decade was pretty tough for me. But there were a couple that were keeping me in the cult. I mean, I had a marriage with somebody who was in the cult. And I was afraid that even though the marriage wasn't so good, I wanted to be in the marriage. And if I had left the cult, I would have lost the marriage. I had a business relationship with someone in the group, and that same thing would have happened. So when that business relationship started to sour, that's about when I left the group.
Okay. But from what you've just said there is where I start to draw lines between sort of this group and some of the struggles that people in things like Mormonism start to face, because their communities are so insular that if you needed roof repair or plumbing, you know, as a Mormon family, that service would be provided by a Mormon kind of roof repair person or a Mormon plumber. And if you were to have kind of one of these businesses yourself, let's say, you know, I'm a Mormon mechanic and I decide to leave the faith and I live in a very heavily Mormon-based area, I will no longer receive any, or most likely, because I don't want to assume, wouldn't then get any Mormon customers come to get their cars fixed by me as a mechanic. So in your group, you have this business venture that you are tied up with, and a marriage, so a romantic relationship as well. These are all things that add to the kind of sunk cost fallacy, but also are things that you've said, you know, you want this marriage to work, you don't want to leave this person, so you don't want to be shunned by the group, because being shunned by the group is the inevitable end of that communication with your spouse. So you're in a very difficult situation here, and I can see why you said that kind of for the last decade plus, you're treading the line between being in the group and leaving the group. And that is such a huge amount of time for somebody to tread that waterfall. I imagine you must have just felt like you were just keeping your head like above water for that entire, like treading water for that entire time. You must be absolutely exhausted.
I never thought I would leave. I thought it would be, you know, that the cult would end. Sharon would die, and that would be the end of the cult, and I would be out. Although it turns out that Sharon did die, and they're still going on. But I never thought I would leave. And most people who are in situations like mine don't leave.
And talk us through kind of what happened with you and so you said that the relationship and the business venture with your business partner kind of took a left turn. So that no longer was a worry, and that was then an opportunity for you to leave the group and stay in the marriage, or leave the marriage.
Oh yeah, I should point out I got divorced first in 2010. I got divorced. I got divorced in 2010, and then at the end of 2012 is when my business relationship ceased with another member, and I left. You know, the very, very beginning of 2013 was the last time. Actually, the last time I went was at the very end of 2012. So it happened within 2 years, and that was it. And then I left. There was a lot of emotional turmoil that I was going through, and it was quite traumatic and dramatic as well. There was a lot that happened, and the changes that happened in my life. And then I started to find a new community also in my life that changed everything for me. I started to swim. I mean, I'd always been a swimmer, but I joined a team towards the end of my time in the cult, and that gave me this new community, although I didn't realize it at the time. But I joined the team, and I had something else to do besides what I did at night, and I've become a marathon swimmer. I've swam around Manhattan.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, I swim, I've swam around parts of Long Island. I've swam down the Hudson River. I swim in the winter in cold water. I haven't done the English Channel, but maybe one day, although I doubt it. But
do you know what, as well? You should come and do the English Channel on the Christmas swim, because I grew up on the coast, and for some reason, people always want to go running in costumes into the North Sea, on Christmas Day.
I know people have swam the North Sea. Where do you go from? Is it from Liverpool where you go?
Well, it's funny because I grew up in the southeast, in Britain's most easterly town, and now I live in the northwest. So I can leave my house from my childhood and watch the sun rise, and then get back to Liverpool where I live now to watch the sunset.
That is so cool.
It's pretty incredible, isn't it? I remember many nights in my youth where we would camp on the beach and watch the sunrise. But
wow,
you yourself have experienced now this tumultuous change from being a part of this group and a part of this marriage and a part of this business agreement to then not being a part of any of these things. So when you say it was traumatic and dramatic, I think that's probably downplaying it. And I'm sure this again is something people can find in your book when it's released. These experiences and these changes that you go through, and these things that you have to then navigate. So how? I mean, without giving us too much information, because I know these are the poignant moments in the book.
No, I mean, I'll tell you anything. If you're still listening to this interview, folks, you're probably going to want to buy the book. I mean, I'm assuming, you haven't heard anything yet.
I hope so.
I haven't gotten to the juicy, stuff. But no, seriously, I'll tell anything. I'm happy to. I'm not. There's no secrets.
How did you officially leave? Like, did you give a letter? Did you give a speech? Did you speak to Sharon one-to-one? How was it that you actually said, like, I'm never coming back. This is me. I'm done.
Well, what happened was at the very end, I was missing a lot of classes the last 4 months when I was in the group. And you weren't allowed to miss a class, unless you had a really good reason. You're supposed to go to class even if you were sick.
And this would be kind of more public shaming if you were to miss a class?
Yeah. And I didn't go to a class. It was my birthday, and I went out on a date with somebody. And I didn't feel like going, and I just didn't feel like calling. And I was already seeing a psychiatrist because I was in such a bad state.
Yep.
And in a lot of trouble. I got a phone call from one of the teachers who left me a message and told me that since I hadn't gone to class, Sharon thought maybe I should be leaving school. Maybe I should leave school if I couldn't make it to class. So I called back. I was stunned when I heard that, and I knew that this was not really true, but I thought, maybe I should leave. So I called back the teacher and I said, hey, look, I think you're right. Maybe I should leave. And she was like, no. I'm not saying that you should leave. I'm thinking maybe, Sharon is saying maybe you should.
Right.
I said, you know what? I'm going to call your bluff. I'm not going back.
Wow. Okay.
And then a few months later, Sharon called me and we had a check conversation about it. I didn't talk to her for very long, but they tried to get me to come back. But that was it. And then the day after I left, I realized that I had been in a cult. I mean, really, literally, it was the next day. I was like, oh, that's what it was. I mean, it all came clear. It just became clear. It was the first time it really became clear because I was thinking about somebody else who was there. And I thought, oh, it's too bad he's there. He's really in a bad situation. I was like, holy shit, he was in a cult. I'm like, I was in a cult. I was like, it just all came together. So that's it.
Oh my goodness. To have that the day after you leave, I don't think that's a very common thing to happen across people that leave these high demand groups. I don't think they have that epiphany so soon.
It did. It was so intense, that last period of time, and what they were doing to me and the way I was feeling, and realizing I didn't have to do any of the things they wanted me to do was what made me realize I wasn't in a cult. So like I didn't have to go and be on time. I didn't have to listen to what they were telling me to do. I didn't have to do these exercises. I didn't have to do these mantras. I didn't have to pay. I was like, there were like 12 different things I didn't have to do. It's like, who does 12 things for no reason? Only people who are in cults. So I figured I was in a cult. So it all came together.
So that leads me perfectly like onto my next question. Like, what has life been like since you left this movement? Kind of what has it looked like in terms of recovery? And you've mentioned, you're still a practicing attorney. So talk us through kind of navigating the day where you had that epiphany up to where you are now.
It took, I when I got out, I continued to slide down. I mean, I was physically free, but I was so traumatized, and my thinking was all in, school thought. I was trying to find out, what I had done wrong. I was blaming myself for everything that happened, which is what they kind of taught. I had no self-esteem. I had really no hope. It had been drummed into me that leaving the school was a really bad thing. So now I had left school and I felt, I don't have any protection. I don't have that community of people anymore. I don't have that support. And even though I didn't really want to be there, still unconsciously, it was where I belonged, and I was having dreams about still being in school. And 10 years afterwards, I still have dreams about being there. I mean, that's how traumatic it was. And then I'd lost my business pretty much. And I had a significant amounts of obligations, and I was feeling fairly sure that I would have a lot of difficulty rebuilding the business. And, I wanted to end my life. So how did that change? Therapy. A lot of good friends that I still had. Swimming. Treating myself better. But again, the therapy was the most important thing for me. Professional therapy. Very lucky to get it. Very lucky to afford it. And, and medication.
And is there a specific type of therapy that you accessed? Because some people talk about going to see generic therapists. Some people talk about going to see trauma recovery therapists. Is there any advice you would give in terms of accessing therapy for some people who might be listening today who have been through a similar experience?
I went to a psychiatrist at one of the best hospitals in New York. I was very, very lucky to be able to see. He specializes in psychiatry. I mean, he was a general psychiatrist, and helping people who were in traumatic, abusive situations, I guess, is part of any kind of therapy. So it was talk therapy, but it was mostly talk therapy at first. I didn't have medication for about a year.
Okay.
And it took a while for him to figure out things, what's going on with me, and it took a while for me to understand too. And, but I would recommend, someone who feels good, you got to go, and someone who feels right to you. If it doesn't feel right, don't go. You got to find somebody who feels really good. And just because they have a good recommendation, you don't have to go to somebody like a cult therapist, or I don't think. I mean, my guy was not. And, somebody wants to call me and I can give you my doctor's number, that's fine. But there are tons of great doctors,
Absolutely. And I think...
I was going to say, you don't have to go to a psychiatrist either. You can go to a therapist, a psychologist. You don't necessarily need medication. I did. If you have suicidal thoughts, you should, immediately call up, the National Suicide Prevention Hotline immediately if you have those feelings. And you may have those feelings, 10 years after you got out of a cult. It's traumatic. It lasts a long time.
I've got here on the 17th of December to release your episode, but also to include a link to the article you wrote. And I've just wrote here to include a link to the National Suicide Prevention Hotline for America and the UK. So,
yes. And also, I was going to say link if you... I don't have information about the release of the book is in July of 2022. It's going to be on Arcade Publishing. But, I guess it'll be, you can order it on, pre-order it, I guess, on Amazon or your bookstore. Is probably a better place to buy it. But it's called Manhattan Cult Story.
Manhattan the Cult Story. So that was going to be definitely one of the questions I asked before we leave here today. Manhattan Cult Story, you can pre-order it now, but it will be...
Well, I don't know if you'll be able to pre-order it in, in 2021, but you could look out for it. And if you want to be, told when it's orderable, you can email me.
And what is the best email address to find
email
on?
For me is Spencer, SPENCER 3000 @gmail.com. Yeah, the same one we've been using.
That's super easy. Yeah, Spencer3000 @gmail.com.
Right.
So basically, your takeaway from therapy is find somebody that feels good for you, but talking is good. Even talking is good. It doesn't have to be on a public platform like this one. It can be on a one-to-one basis with your therapist, but talking is good if you find the right person that feels good to you. And of course, if you have access to that type of recovery tool, because some of the people that we might be reaching with this podcast might not have the access to those types of resources. So if you do have access to therapy, talking therapy is very beneficial if you can find the right person for you. There's no shame in it. There's no embarrassment in it. You are literally going to talk to somebody who is qualified in listening and responding in the correct way to help you untangle all of these things that have managed to get themselves so tangled up in your mind over the years that you've been involved in these high demand controlling groups.
Exactly. Yes, totally. I agree. 100%.
I suppose, there's so much we haven't covered, and I know that I'm gonna have to go and read your book to find out all the answers to the questions that I have. And if we were going to cover everything that I had questions for, we'd be here for days. So my last question to you is to ask you if there's anything you think that we have missed about this group that is important to relay to listeners in case they themselves come across a group similar to this one, or themselves are recovering from a group that is similar to this one.
Don't blame yourself. People get conned all the time, every day. It's usually because of your good nature, your openness, your kindness, your inquisitiveness, your desire for something, your vulnerabilities, your humanity, which are all, great things that make people who they are. You got caught in a cult because you had the bad luck of getting targeted by a criminal. people are conned all the time. So I would say that, think about that. If you're in a group and you're listening to this podcast, I mean, you're 90% of the way out. Because once you realize that you're in something like this, you can pretty much extricate yourself. Just if it's, I don't know. I really don't have any good advice on recognizing one if you're in one. But if you're watching this, you're probably in one. If you think you are, you're probably in one. Even if they tell you you're not. That's what I would say.
The hardest thing about navigating these things is the identification is very obscure for a reason,
yes.
for a purpose.
Yes.
And I think you're right in what you say, but you're also right when you say that people shouldn't feel shameful or embarrassed because they've been targeted by a criminal. And that's the first time I think I've heard it worded in that way. And I think that's probably what I'll use when I do the social media post for this episode. Targeted by criminal is exactly what it is. You were targeted by Sharon, who wanted to further gain her control and power over people, put herself into a position of control to gain assets from people who have very successful career paths and monetary value, and not much other than that to Sharon herself. The monetary value itself being the crux of the reason why she pushed people so far into this movement with the thought reform that she enforced on people and the secrecy involved, because of the previous things that had come out about her and her partner when they were in San Francisco. So I think what you said there, Spencer, about not feeling ashamed or embarrassed because these people have been targeted by a criminal, that's the most important takeaway, I think, from this episode. And that just leaves me to say thank you so much for coming and speaking with me on the show, for talking us through kind of like what we can expect from your book and the pieces of information that you will delve into deeper with your writing. And for letting us know that will be available from July 2022, probably wherever people buy their books from and their memoirs. And if we're lucky enough, maybe we'll even feature it on the podcast, because each month we run a monthly memoir giveaway. And
yes, definitely.
Would love to feature your book.
Absolutely. You tell me and we'll do it. Tell me what I need.
Yeah, that's super exciting.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, can I tell you how much I enjoyed being on this? I enjoyed so much. This is intensely, I told you this is the best podcast on cults, and now I know, because of your deep dive, deep interest, and your exceptional knowledge and perceptions on it. And I'm really just delighted to have been interviewed by you.
Thank you so much, Spencer. It's a privilege to have had you here today to talk to you at length about your experiences, to learn more about Sharon Gan herself and this warped kind of group that she created, and all of these very intelligent, intellectual, very successful people that she'd managed to bring into the fold with very specific, meticulous methods of control that she put into place, that I'm excited for listeners to learn more about through listening to this episode and reading your book once it's here. So thank you so much for your time today, Spencer. Thank you so much for speaking out on this subject, for allowing this information to come public, because who knows how many groups are in the shadows that we don't know about, because they adopt this same extremely secretive methodology And if it wasn't for people such as yourself, we would never learn about these groups, and we would never learn about the red flags and things to watch out for. So thank you so much for being here today. And I really, really hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much. It was so great to meet you.
Take care, Spencer. Bye-bye.
Bye, hon. Take care.